Hello, coming to you from the hot city of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Stylin Bryce. Tied in with a popular recurring Out of the Dust geek list on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we play that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 40. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring Walnut Grove out of the dust, and a contributor will dust off Star Wars Imperial Assault. On the reaction segment, I continue the saga of the Game of Thrones card game Kickstarter. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review Carreau. On the Obscure Bryce game segment, I review Key Harvest. And we wrap up the episode by taking a look at game number 4 on my top 5 favorite Kickstarter countdown. I had a chance to bring Walnut Grove, a 2011 worker movement tile placement game from publisher Lookout Games and designers Paul Land and Taoko Takokallio, that currently sits just outside the top 1,000 on BGG. Paul has a couple of obscure games with just a handful of registered owners in the BGG database, but Taoko is much better known as the designer of Eclipse, a game that has no similarities whatsoever to Walnut Grove. I last played Walnut Grove 2 years, 8 months, and 17 days ago. I don't recall the occasion of that play, but this time I taught the game to my friends Peter and CJ, who I hadn't shown the game to before. Walnut Grove is a briskly brutal game, and it's one I always like to have in the back of my mind if a group is looking for a challenge in a short period of time. This is the sort of game that mercilessly punishes the slightest mistake, and I like to compare it to Steffenfeld's In the Year of the Dragon in that regard. That's a low-scoring game in which each player only gets a very limited number of actions over the course of the entire game. Most of a player's efforts revolve around keeping their workers from starving and freezing to death, and timing actions that actually yield points is pivotally important and is always the difference between victory or defeat in this game. Peter and CJ enjoyed the game quite a bit, and CJ said he could see himself playing this game multiple times in a row in a single evening. With that in mind, I wouldn't be surprised if this one doesn't get dusty again in the near future. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Murray Fish, username MuzzFish4, brought the popular 2014 Fantasy Flight game Star Wars Imperial Assault from designers Justin Kampayanen, Corey Konecka, and Jonathan Ying out of the dust. Murray last played it 4 years, 1 month, and 3 days ago, and currently rates it an 8.2 out of 10. He writes, I played a trial game of Star Wars Imperial Assault when I first got it, and then settled down to paint the miniatures. Just over 4 years later, I'm still not finished, but a friend picked up the game and expansion, so he started a campaign with the intention we meet every fortnight to play a mission. We're running it off an app, so we're all rebels. I'm playing Jyn Erso, the smuggler, and we're teamed up with a Mon Calamari, a good friend but a great snack, Jedi wannabe, and a rebel trooper who answers to the name of Cyril Figgis. Yes, our games are this serious. Anyway, our team was tasked with defending the last few transports, evacuating Yavin 4 after the destruction of the first Death Star. The game played very well, and we managed to hold on even with the Dark Lord of the Sith showing up to put the Frighteners on us toward the end. Anyway, the 4 of us are ensconced on the Freedom Fighter and are out in the wider galaxy looking for adventure, excitement, and really wild things. Naturally, the next scheduled session was cancelled because only 2 of us could make it. Thanks for the contribution, Murray. Imperial Assault is a game I own because the emphasis on characters appeals to me more than the typical Star Wars emphasis on ships. I was hoping the app might encourage me to play it more often, but it hasn't happened yet. There's just so much to play, and campaign games have always been a struggle for me to keep up interest in. I hope you fare better. Last week on the reaction segment, I started taking a look at the already legendarily infamous Game of Thrones card game Kickstarter. I discussed how the campaign was initially received by observers and backers as a ridiculously inept project to have a little fun with. But then things got serious. One backer investigating the online presence of the designer, Daniel Perez, discovered a live-streamed YouTube video of Daniel playing a video game. At one point during the 7-hour video, Daniel takes a break from his game to verbally abuse his wife and kid, and what sounds like physical blows are dealt. Confronted with this audio recording of abuse, Daniel denied it in the comments section and said he was clearly joking in the clip. The audio is horrifying and haunting, and the backers were unconvinced by this story. In fact, many of them decided to call Daniel's local police, log a concern of abuse, and provide copies of the audio as evidence. They had to provide copies because, in the meantime, Daniel had edited his video and deleted the offensive bit. News reports at this time mentioned that police who paid a visit to Daniel's home in response to backers' allegations didn't find any immediate obvious evidence of abuse but did observe deplorable living conditions, which prompted them to scheduling a visit with social workers. In response to the scheduled visit, Daniel and his wife fled with their children to neighboring Rhode Island, prompting police to issue a silver alert. While they were on the run, Kickstarter suspended the Game of Thrones card game campaign, citing problems with use of the Game of Thrones license. Undeterred, while on the run, Daniel moved the campaign to Indiegogo, launching a new campaign at that site. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about that campaign was that, initially, despite advertising the same game as before, none of the backer levels actually included a copy of the game. All the backer levels were for various forms of Game of Thrones merchandise instead. The Indiegogo campaign also claimed to be raising funds to secure the Game of Thrones license, a dramatic reversal of claims that permission had already been granted. While the Indiegogo campaign was still running, Daniel launched a second Kickstarter game under a different alias, with the claim that the game, now called Race to the Iron Throne, was inspired by the mechanics of the original campaign and was totally legit because the game was only inspired by the Game of Thrones license and not actually using it. Backers and observers were left baffled by which was more ridiculous, the idea that they should be persuaded that Daniel's alias was a different person, or the idea that someone actually thought the original game was worthwhile enough to copycatting. Backers and observers also wondered how the hell Daniel had time to launch 2 new campaigns while being on the run from police, and did he have more important things to worry about anyway? In any event, the family was located and the children placed in foster care, which caused backers and observers of the unfolding drama to breathe a sigh of relief. Within a day of their launch, both the Indiegogo campaign and the second Kickstarter campaign were suspended by the various platforms. Indiegogo did not provide a reason, but Kickstarter released this statement of explanation for the campaign suspension. A creator, or someone directly related to them, posing as an independent party to create the illusion of support in project comments or elsewhere, appropriating someone else's biography or falsifying an identity, misrepresenting or failing to disclose relevant facts about the project or its creator. So, both of the campaigns suspended, the children rescued, and the parents under investigation of the authorities. You would think that would be the conclusion of the story, wouldn't you? Except that it wasn't. There was still more to come, and that's what we'll take a look at next week. The apparent, maybe, conclusion of the Game of Thrones card game Kickstarter drama. This week on the What I've Been Playing segment, I'm going to tell you about a new Kickstarter I just got in the mail that I've already had a chance to try out several times. A game called Carreau. This is a one-dexterity game handmade by the designer, Gavin Birnbaum. It founded in March, and here in the middle of May, it's already shipped to all backers. A 2-month turnaround time, a full 4 months ahead of schedule. That's craziness in a good way, because that kind of speed never happens with a Kickstarter game. I first became aware of this game when it launched, and I saw pictures of it at the Kickstarter Tracking Geek list on BoardGameGeek. The beautiful pics were enough to bring me to the project page and watch a video of the game in action. After viewing the video, I thought, oh man, this looks like tons of fun. I'm going to have to back this. I'm always on the lookout for unique family weight games, and this one firmly grabbed my attention. Here's how it works. A small rubber ball sits on a board composed of a grid of small holes. Each player controls a functional catapult that launches dice-like cubes onto the board. Players are trying to be the one with their cubes closest to the ball. But because it's a ball, it's entirely possible that it gets moved around on the board when impacted by a launched cube, thus creating an uncertain movable target. If a player manages to knock the ball entirely off the board, that's a Carreau, and they score 3 points. Otherwise, after each player has launched all 3 of their cubes, the player with the closest cube to where the ball wound up scores 1 point for each of their cubes closer to the ball than any other player's cubes. Multiple rounds are played until one player reaches 5 points. It's a simple, elegant design, and launching cubes with an actual catapult is just as fun as it sounds. One thing I didn't expect that I was particularly impressed by was the built-in tension of the game. Because players can potentially score more than half the points they need to win in a single round, the winner is always uncertain, even if one player happens to be in a commanding lead. A single launch cube can change the entire makeup of the game in surprising ways, and when a Carreau happens, it's a genuinely exciting event. My 4-year-old pulled it off once, and you've never seen a more excited kid. This game turned out to be everything I hoped it would be, and I couldn't be happier with this Kickstarter success. The designer's coming out with a new Kickstarter for a different wind dexterity game soon called Paris, and it's earned my consideration because of the success Carreau has been for my family. And in the meantime, Carreau is a game I'm going to plan a demo whenever the opportunity arises. My sons and I already have it slated as our next For Kids by Kids demo at Spielbound, Omaha's local board game cafe, at the end of May. Obscure Bryce Game segment time. This week on the segment, I'm going to tell you about Key Harvest, the forgotten fifth game of Richard Breeze's Key series. A lot of people don't even know there was a whole series of games before Keyflower, which is the seventh game of the series, and Key Harvest is one of the more overlooked ones. I've had it on my wish list for quite some time. It's the most affordable of the older Key games on the secondary market, and it was just a matter of time before it connected with me in a math trade. It didn't take long for me to get to the table after it did. And this one, the Key of Kingdom, Keywood, has decided to create a land registry for players to develop. Ooh, land registry! Sounds like an exciting idea for a game, doesn't it? But here's how it works. Players each get an identical personal board depicting a portion of Keydom divided up into land allotments. Each of these allotments is numbered and produces a particular kind of resource. On their turn, players perform their choice of two different actions from a menu of 4. They can put 1 or 2 land tiles from the limited display up for sale by putting it into their personal store and assigning a price in resources to it. They can purchase land tiles from another player's store by paying them the combination of resources asked for, or land tiles from their store, except for those just put out for sale, by paying the price they fixed to the general store. They can produce resources by flipping over the land tiles on their board, or they can place a worker tile which grants immediate special abilities, but can only be placed adjacent to a certain number of tiles already in play. There are also event tiles mixed in with the land tiles, and when these are revealed, a universal immediate effect of some kind occurs. When a certain number of these event tiles are resolved, then the game ends. Players score points for the value of the workers they brought into play, and for their 2 largest connected areas of land tiles. The largest only scores 1 point per tile, while the second largest scores 2. This game surprised me, and I'm not sure why it didn't catch on like Keyflower did. The interaction between players maneuvering to get certain tiles is intense and very thinking. The use of the worker tiles is clever and innovative. In fact, I really like how those worker tiles fit into the game, as positioning them just right is often the difference between success or failure. I demoed the game for a couple of different groups and taught my wife it, and it was well received by everyone. Since this particular early Key game is still so affordable on the secondary market, I highly suggest that anyone who is a fan of this series seek it out. Last week, we started my top 5 favorite Kickstarters that I've backed. This week, we take a look at number 4, Dinosaur Island, the popular dinosaur park management worker placement game from publisher Pandasaurus and designers Jonathan Gilmore and Brian Lewis. Small spoiler, this won't be the last dinosaur-themed game that appears on this list. Haha. I actually hemmed and hawed about backing this when the first campaign launched. As much as I love the theme, that crazy artwork was a big turnoff for me. Backers of the original campaign will recall that the artwork was a big controversy surrounding the game at the time, and I was in the camp that was not a fan. I remember the content creators explaining that the art was thematic as representative of the 90s, though that still didn't satisfactorily explain to me why that was a good reason to go with it. And maybe I just grew up in a different part of the country than they did, but I don't remember the 90s looking like that. In any event, I backed the game despite the art, not because of it. My love of dinosaurs won out this time. I remember getting the deluxe edition in the mail and wondering what made the game so heavy, then opening it and being blown away by those amazing coins. But as cool as that particular component was, Dinosaur Island is also noteworthy as possessing the stupidest stretch goal of all time, the mini-pogs. Mini-pog. I still get a crack thinking about those. At the time, punching them out, I had no idea what they were for. I had to go back to the campaign page